trauma and adversity can have major ramifications for our adult relationships. However, we often don't recognize the way in which our past experiences are impacting on our current reality. And sometimes as well, we don't even recognize the fact that we may have experienced trauma. I think people tend to look at things like sexual or physical abuse, whereas oftentimes it's the level of attachment or connection that we have with our carer that really impacts the way in which we're able to connect with people in our adult life. So it's always worth exploring, particularly if you notice yourself feeling triggered in relationships, if you really struggle to let the guard down, or if you find yourself being very distrustful and feeling unsafe in your relationships for no real apparent cause. And again, be very careful about the fact that we tell ourselves very convincing stories about what the reality is. So oftentimes, even though we may be projecting certain things onto a relationship, we may not be able to recognize that. And even creating that sense of self-awareness is a skill in itself, and usually needs an objective person to help you guide your way through it. However, that being said, reverting back to the impact that trauma has on a person's ability to be in a relationship and to thrive in a relationship. First of all, when somebody has grown up in a very chaotic environment, they tend to have a poor sense of self and a low sense of self-worth and self-acceptance. So this means that they're not fully sure of who they are in themselves. So when they get into a relationship, it can go one or two ways. They either feel completely claustrophobic, they can't handle the fact that they have to deal with another person, or they feel very clingy. They really want to attach to the other person. It's like as if they want to nearly absorb some of the other person's identity, and neither are very healthy. Likewise, they struggle with their emotional state. They find it hard to deal with intense emotions. They find it hard to communicate intense emotions. They either tend to withdraw internally when they're hurting or when they feel a grievance has occurred, or they lash out. And this can be very confusing for the other person involved, because basically they don't know what to expect, and they don't always know what they've done wrong. Because again, when you have experienced adversity in your formative years, you become very distrustful about the world, and you can sometimes project the pain of your past onto your current reality. So you may be highly triggered by something that may not actually justify your reaction. And it's a horrible place to be, because ultimately when two people meet and when they fall in love, there's no nicer place in the world to be. And this creates a sense of helplessness and hopelessness for both parties, and can leave both people feeling very, very isolated. And I suppose the worst thing about it is, when somebody has experienced a difficult childhood, is they crave that love, they crave that attachment, and that's why they don't shun relationships completely, or well, most of them don't. And yet when it's offered to them, when they're in a healthy relationship, they can't seem to recognize it, they can't seem to allow it, because they can't trust it, because their blueprint for relationships is so skewed by their past that they assume that relationships equate to pain. So for the person who is in the relationship with somebody who has been hurt, I suppose the first thing I would say to you is, don't take it personally, because I suppose this person is dealing with their past experiences. This is not necessarily a reflection on you. Likewise, don't make assumptions. Don't think that you know what is going on for the other person, because you actually don't. And no matter how many times they explain things to you, you can never assume to know 100% what's going on. So try to always be open to listening, open to hearing them, open to seeing them, and helping them validate their experience. And then get help. Get help in communicating. Get help in working on your own resiliency, because God knows you're going to need it, and get help in working through your own self-awareness, your own self-acceptance, so that you're able to show up for the other person, put in place any boundaries that need putting in place, and also also meet them in the middle, in their pain, and forget about trying to solve things or fix things or heal things. I mean, that's not your job. All your job is to love this person. So if you can kind of move away from the responsibility that codependency creates, and that enmeshment that often occurs in relationships where one or two people are unhealthy, if you can step away a little bit and try to remain as objective in a loving and compassionate way as possible, then you'll be a lot better off. So keep doing things for yourself. Make sure that you have the right support in place. For the person who is struggling, I suppose, first of all, it's creating an awareness of the fact that you are being impacted by your past. That past events are standing in your way of connecting with another person, of creating that deep, meaningful relationship that you essentially crave, And it's about recognizing that, first of all, finding acceptance for it, because oftentimes grieving what has gone before and grieving where we are now is a big part of the process, and it's something that people really struggle with. Likewise, be very compassionate with yourself. Recognize that a lot of the work has to be done on yourself, but a lot of the work has to be done in connection with another person as well. I mean, ultimately, the reason why we do a lot of work for ourselves, in the lines of self-acceptance and self-awareness, and creating a curiosity about the world around us and finding a way to live a fulfilling life. It's so that we can add to other people's lives. It's so that we can connect in a deep, meaningful way with other people. So it's about recognizing that you don't need to isolate yourself in this. You don't need to feel alone in it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. So many people struggle in relationships. It is unbelievable, because ultimately there's no such thing as perfect parenting. I mean, we all fuck up. We all kind of make mistakes. And unfortunately, sometimes a child just doesn't get the nourishment and nurturing that they needed. And this can be healed. This isn't a life sentence. This is something that you can work on. So, try to move away from the kind of sense of hopelessness and this jumping from one relationship to another, or, kind of just ignoring things and hoping that they go away, and grab onto it and say, do you know what? I deserve better. I don't want to go through my life feeling like this. I don't want to go through my life in pain. I don't want to push the people that I love the most away. So I am taking responsibility and ownership for this, and I'm going to get through it. And once you've made that decision, things will shift, and you may have to change significant ways of thinking, significant ways of living, and possibly get the help of somebody else to get you through this process. Because again, the level of insight that is required sometimes requires an objective person to initially give you that, I suppose, ability to see the way in which you are self-sabotaging. And once you've developed it, it becomes like any skill. You kind of put it in place, you become more self-aware, you're able to recognize the way in which you interpret things, and it becomes a lot easier as time goes by, as long as you continue on with your diligence and your routines and your disciplines and practices of mindfulness and meditation and whatever it is that keeps you on the straight and narrow. If you are struggling in your relationship, if any of this resonates with you, and you are either struggling with somebody who finds it really hard to let their guard down, you find that your partner is very defensive or withdrawn, or indeed if it's you that's struggling in your relationship and you feel like some past experience or your general childhood in itself is impacting on your overall life satisfaction, then get in touch with me on my website. It is fundamentals.ie.